Thank you, everyone. My name is Alan Baptista. I am the product marketing manager for Chef Compliance, and I have the pleasure of co-presenting with Chris Medina, our resident compliance expert. He is one of the most knowledgeable people that I know in terms of this area. So we'll tap into his expertise kind of later on. We'll do a tag team here in terms of our presentation style is usually a conversation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comment in the chat section. We will gladly address them either when they come up or later on in the presentation. These are some of the items that we're going to be talking to you. We're going to be talking about reaching continuous compliance. What does it mean? Compliance as code is a very kind of underlying message that we have in this slide and then in our positioning to the marketplace. We're going to talk a little bit about FFIEC compliance. We're going to do a little chef compliance show and tell. What does it mean to have compliance as code or policies as code? And then we're going to provide you some next steps to kind of look further into reaching your FFIEC compliance using chef compliance as a key cornerstone of that automation effort. Why don't you introduce yourself real quick, Chris, while I transition the slides?
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, my name is Chris Medina. I've been working here at Chef for a few years now, but I've been with the U.S. military, worked for some three-letter agencies, been a security guy my entire life. So, and hopefully I add value. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I love to talk with people about their methodologies and some of their frameworks of which you're trying to do this stuff. So it really helps, from a standpoint of just a practitioner's view of things. So looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me on, Alan.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So this is one of my favorite pictures because it always kind of alludes to the plugging of holes in a dam. And driving compliance and securing systems sometimes just feels like you're plugging in those holes in the dam, right? You put one finger here and another one pops up over there, and you kind of patch over there, and then another one down here. Kind of reminds me of the cartoon days. But it's really ultimately what you're trying to do is plug those holes, those entry gaps, right? And ultimately, if you're finding these compliance failures in production, you've failed down as your organization. Is this something you see out there, kind of that feeling of trying to patch holes into a, flowing waterfall there?
This is a great picture, especially for SOC people. If you worked in the SOC or you work in the SOC, this should resonate with you very well, because at the speed of which we are making changes and development is trying to push in new feature functionality, new updates for whatever it is. We want, different types of servers. We want new applications. We've got a new patch that's coming out. We're, doing all this stuff. It was constantly, I've got one finger here, I've got one finger there. So it was a mad rat race to see how fast we could shore things up and keep the flow of the work going. So I love this picture myself.
Very cool. And this is kind of the cornerstone of our message, that there's a need for speed, the need for speed and delivery of innovation, as you mentioned, new code, new business value. It's obviously at an all-time high, right? And every organization across the board is really trying to bring their applications, their business solutions, or ultimately value to market fast, be the first one and out there and producing that over their competition. But then what happens if this speed comes at to what cost to the organization? Is the cost of speed or quality is quality the impact of being fast? Or even worse, is it the cost of security to your systems, to your environments, to your business knowledges? There's this delicate balance that needs to happen between the need for speed and the ability that organizations have to secure and maintain their systems under compliance. And we talk, why is that? Why is it so hard to maintain that balance? Gartner also agrees here that the balance, the speed for risk by leveraging automation and implementing compliance as code is the way to go. But we'll get a little bit more into that in a few minutes. But why is it so difficult to maintain that speed and security balance? Well,
Yeah. Alan, you know what? In that last one, it was always the anecdote was speed, security, or price. Pick two. You can
right,
only
yeah,
get two of the three, So it's difficult for sure.
yeah, that is true for sure. Um, so the need for security and compliance is and should be non-negotiable. You're not competing. You shouldn't you know short cycle yourself in terms of security, which causes many impediments in the ability to deliver with speed. Because here are some of the reasons we see that security reviews are typically at the end of the process. When slippage usually happens, right, the delays that are put into the development kind of squeeze security review, causing tremendous pressure, and if it happened, and it may not impede the delivery of the said solution or innovation. And then we talk a little bit about audits and the way that is the measurable way of verifying that your systems are compliant. Um, and they take away from very valuable productive time. Staffs have to work on those set innovation and business values instead of having to work on reporting on audits, right? And having to concentrate on these manual, very time consuming and cumbersome audit process. And then ultimately, when you're done, that appropriately, the current security and compliance efforts or processes really limit the visibility and hinder this collaboration across teams. And we'll go a little bit more into that shortly. But the prevailing perception in the InfoSec is that InfoSec policies really slow things down. This recent Gartner survey highlighted that there are 81% of IT professionals agree that InfoSec policies really inhibit agility and actually and add agility and speed for that matter. And then 77% of the security professional themselves agree that policies really slow things down. So we're not saying something really new here, right, Chris?
Now, you know what? The key word in this whole thing is velocity, right? And there's some elements to that. That's a rate at which I can get an idea from a developer out to production and usable, right? And all the things in between. So that dictates the velocity at which I can get things done. And so typically you've got, three real inputs on that, which are development, operations, and then security. And development always wants to go fast. I want to get it out there. This is the great thing. I've got it all worked up. The code is ready. Let's get it out. Operations is like, okay, so don't change anything. I don't need to, manipulate, the framework at which we get things out there. So make sure that whatever it is you're coding doesn't cause me to change, the operation and the workflow process. But then security comes along and says, hey, everybody stop. I've got to check all this out, make sure there's no bugs, make sure there's no 0 days, make sure there's no infiltration, leakage, pieces in here. How, on earth did you decide that you were going to get it in there? So, fast, maintain, and then completely stop is the challenge that we go through. We're trying to get the best to market or the best to the agency or whomever we're working with.
Yeah, and why is that? Because the current state of informational security is, despite the velocity that other teams like development and operations that we talked about, the DevOps side of DevSecOps, right? Sec is kind of still lagging behind, right? And we're seeing that there's a continuous demand to increase that speed that, like we talked about, that pressure potentially amplifies these existing issues. Breaches take a long time to find, and exploitations occur really on known vulnerabilities like that, like the stats we're showing there. Like, since 2014, more than 90% of the exploits observed use only 9 known vulnerabilities. So it's not that we don't know about the vulnerabilities, it's just we're having a hard time getting to them and fixing them very quickly.
Yeah.
And
Especially
then,
in a complex environment, right? Because we're spend as a security person, we like to spend our time up front. We like to look at the gateway and understand, all the bad things that are happening, all the 0 days. I'd rather not spend my days on the back end, trying to make sure that everything's coming into production secure, or that everybody knows about the latest vulnerability, so on and so forth, so it gets there.
yeah, and we talk about the kind of the audit perspective as well. That we did a recent survey in 2020 with CSO Online, and we figured out that on average, it takes about 2 months for organizations to really complete a solid audit. And then even though they complete those audits, usually on a quarterly basis, 73% of the companies we interviewed actually agreed that they they knowingly release vulnerabilities at least once a year. 73%, that's almost 3/4 of the companies say, you know what, we understand the vulnerability is out there and we'll fix it later. So that is a scary stat, to be honest. And why is it that? We talked about it briefly, right? This very manual and time consuming resource or effort that is security review and the compliance evaluation is usually at the end of the process, right before it goes into production. It may rely on scanning tools that generate too much data and false positives, a lot of noise. It's very hard to break out what is important in that information. And then we may even catch those problems really too late in the development cycle to really fix it economically. Remember that every stage in the development cycle is a tenfold more expensive to find and solve those issues. So we really like to talk about shifting your opportunities left and allowing for the team to work earlier in their ability to provide security and compliance status. Is this a reality that resonates, Chris, out there?
Oh, absolutely. So a couple of things with this. Look, where the rubber meets the road is it comes down to a business decision a lot of times with security. You've got, your senior execs going, well, it's okay to release a couple of bad bugs in a particular area for sake of, schedule, right? Because it'll cost us, X amount of dollars or X amount of time or some type of energy that we're spending. So it's okay to do that, and we'll go back and we'll fix that later, as opposed to, hey, I've got these really high profile, these really important applications and or data that we want to secure. Those are the things we're really going to slow up on and ensure that we've got the best security surrounding it. And you've got to make those decisions every day. You have to, understand the entire environment, put a value against each part of those assets, and then make sure that the security methodology and frameworks around them are equivalent to what it is that you need at that time. So, when we go through a process like this is a typical, right when those decisions flow down, this is typical of how we, get things into production from a workflow standpoint. And there's some other stages that you can put in there, but everybody's different. The complexity is in the different types of workflow management or workflows that you have to create that production environment.
That's a great point. And then when we talk a little bit about audits, I think this is one area that is quite, I really enjoy this slide, and the struggle to remain compliant is kind of an interesting one, right? And generally the assumption is that the level of compliance is very linear, and periodic checks done every quarter, so let's say, is done to validate that constant level of compliance. But what really happens is not a constant, it's not a linear aspect, because to what Chris mentioned earlier, a lot of new aspects, new environments, new technologies, new applications are brought in instant after you've completed that audit. So a lot of it happens, right? So what happens in reality is more in line with the chart on the right hand side, where you see these valleys, these dips, that the known level of vulnerability of compliance is really kind of lowering there. So if you have to check, what you have to really do is be able to check more often, so that the window of validation actually shortens it a little bit, and the more it's shortened, the more you're able to almost provide a continuous compliance state because you're checking it more often.
Yeah, the shorter the interval, the less the risk, right?
Less the risk because you're checking it most often, and you're able to kind of streamline, really. So is this kind of a true aspect, or is it just a marketing slide?
Yeah. So the left graph shows you everything that I would give to my CISO. Right. I would make sure that they would have a report that looked very clean and very straightforward. We're passing everything. We look good across the board, and they could report that to whomever they were, the board or whomever, the CIO, the CEO. The right chart is what I saw on a daily basis, right? Because you've got this factory, this machine called DevOps or development that's just constantly pushing new feature functionality, or we need, patch updates, or, all those specifications, as Gardner calls them. We need to ensure that those specifications are in alignment with what our policy is. And that policy constantly changes depending on the threats and the individuals who, try to breach our systems or use it maliciously. So yeah, this is absolutely a real world depiction of what's happening at both levels.
Very cool. And then we talked a little bit about different teams and different languages. The speed and risk, remember that balance that is needed. We need to move faster. Ultimately, we need to move more intelligently without adding risk to the security of the estate. So that balancing act problem gets exacerbated really by the fact that these different teams are having different views. They're very specific to their practice, but they may be using different tools as well. And when to accomplish their desired state tasks within their area of responsibility. For instance, the compliance officers likely has a big list or binder full of regulations and things that they need that need the systems to be followed. Then you may have your security team that's taking those requirements and using scanning tools to make sure and validate that things are the way they're supposed to be. And then you'll have the dev or the DevOps teams that are actually having to fix any problems that they might have uncovered from that reality. So different languages, different tool sets are really, really hard to manage because they're different tools for different purposes. And there's a necessary translation that happens between those players. The compliance regulations need to be translated into security scans, and the outputs of those security scans need to be translated into resolutions or remediations. And ultimately, that's a lot of manual handoff and a lot of things that may be lost time and lost in translation, to be quite frank. So it's extremely important for everybody in the organization to really have the ability to understand a complete security compliance posture so that they can sort out, they have ideally have a single source of truth for all of these teams to make sure that they're actually working on the same problem using the same language and the same source of knowledge, the same source of truth. And the beauty of all this, that once it's done in this common language, this common set of tools, that everyone, security, compliance, and development and operations, are all things that they can do to help codify or put into code and ultimately automate. We'll get into a little bit more on the benefits there, solving what we talked about, those peaks and valleys, right? Which ultimately means that we are constantly having the ability to evaluate your compliance state. And the key thing about doing that is using compliance as code, is that you can check your compliance at any point in time or in any system that you manage. So why not do that compliance all the time so that you know immediately when your systems are out of compliance? So you don't need to worry with that long window of audit validation that really occurs. How do you see this playing out in the field and in conversation with your customers, Chris?
You know, it's very disparate with them. They oftentimes come to me with, "Hey, what's a common language, Chris?" We're all very like interested in what it is that we do. For instance, if I'm a developer, I've got an application that broadcasts on port 80, right? And it does certain things and it allows certain accesses, from that aspect. From security is like, well, port 80 needs to be secure. Maybe we want to run on, you know, 8080, or, there's certain aspects of maintaining an encrypted protocol, against what those communications would look like. And then compliance is, hey, I just need to make sure that, you know, we're running at the particular policies that the company has put in place. Hey, I want to ensure that, you have, PKI set up for certificates in terms of making those communications happen, or, they're interested in very different things, but they're all interested in, say, port 80. So there is a common language in there. And it's arguable that, automation, if we're looking at port 80 and we're inspecting it and we're doing all the things, against examining it and making those communications happen, that automation can be that one language that we're speaking to create cohesion between the groups. And that, usually spawns a lot greater discussion and brings the teams together. So, and which they've never had before. Typically, they're like cats and dogs when you get these teams in
Yeah,
one room.
fighting at each other. Yeah, exactly. So we talk about a lot about compliance as code, or codification of compliance through policy and controls. Because why do we believe that code is where it's at? Because code enables what we talked about, continuous compliance. It's an ambiguous common language. It is scalable. It can work in different settings and different environments. It doesn't need to be only exclusively to the cloud. You can able to shift it left through the delivery process. You can actually put it into a CI/CD pipeline, so it can be easily automated. And then it provides you this continuous visibility, the ability to kind of have a continuous view of your compliance state across your entire portfolio, not just the cloud, not just on-prem, not just your data center. So you have a complete vision across any environments, omnipresent, right? How do you see that code really being played into a reality, Chris?
We're going to talk about, I have some examples that I want to show everybody, and we'll walk through it. But as you can see, this example right here is great, right? If you've got a common language, and it's not like rocket science, you don't need a decryptor to understand what's happening in it. It tells you, hey, I've got a control package 2 that we're looking for specific things, in this instance, a telnet server. We talk about the alignment to those controls, and align it to, PCI, HIPAA, and NIST. And then we talk about where we get that information from. But then at the end, we say, hey, tell me about it. Let's test this. Let's talk about what exactly this thing should look like. It's Telnet D. We want to understand that it's not installed on this particular system. And that's very straightforward. Any auditor with any sort of security background, or any general knowledge of computers, can understand what's happening for this particular control check. And that speeds up your process for audit and allows things to move a whole lot smoother when you're understanding what your compliance levels look like.
Yeah, that's great. So here's our kind of continuous compliance ecosystem, right? Where we believe that organizations can use CIS, profile or benchmarked certified content that Chef helps produce, which is part of your Chef compliance kind of subscription. You're able to access that trusted content aligned to those benchmarks that I mentioned, CIS or DISA STIGs, for audit, and the remediation content for that matter. This remediation content helps organizations to ensure their remediation actions, their audit and remediation actions are consistent across the board. They use, it's the secured chain of custody. And once you have that content, you can define those compliance baselines and tune them to your actual organizational need. So we give you an entire benchmark, but you can, which can be modified really, which allows you some flexibility to also include waivers to allow for individual controls to be flagged as waived in order to avoid false positives and or misconfigurations. So once you have that baseline defined, you can have it continuously run and monitored to evaluate the compliance posture of your system by detecting any deviations from that intended state at any point in the software development lifecycle or in any environment that you may have. And once that remediation or once that variation from desired state, you can easily remediate that non-compliant within remediation capabilities that really address individual controls in alignment with those audit tests that you have done. You can encode those fixes to enable this continuous compliance state. And then remediation can be applied easily and sometimes even without requiring coding skills. And ultimately, it's important to Chris's point to maintain that comprehensive view and up-to-date visibility across that heterogeneous estates that you provide, easily viewing the differences between the baseline and your remediated state, and actually track the waiver status and enable this fast and accurate audits at any time. It expedites from 2 months to days, some hours. You can have instant ad hoc reports that are done very quickly and efficiently, allowing you to have audits done continuously almost. Any thoughts here, Chris?
No, this is well, remember, we're talking about money here, right? So having continuous visibility on what my alignment looks like is very important, especially to the end customer. I mean, that's my money, you know, I want to make sure that it's secured. And it also, there's a lot of regulations around the information that surrounds, you know, us doing business with financials. There's a lot of GDPR information, a lot of personal information that can allow people to access other types of tools that we use. So making sure that we keep this, you know,
Lockdown.
continuous. Yeah, it's got to be there.
Yeah, and we believe that through that codification, through compliance as code is a key part of your compliance automation. You can scan early and often in your SDLC. So instead of performing what we talked about, remember that security check and that compliance check at the end, you're really able to do it continuously across your development cycle. Essentially, you're shifting left for development, but you're also able to shift it right into production, allowing you to have that continuous view of your compliant state and devices. So I want to talk to you a little bit about FFIEC compliance. And this, hopefully all this is something that everyone understands and it's not news, but to level set some of the standards. You know, FFIEC stands for Federal Financial Institution Examination Council. It provides this unique uniform principles, standards, and report forms for the federal examination of financial institutions by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. And the guidance comes from the Federal Reserve, FDIC, the National Credit Union Administration, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and more recently, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They use some strict NIST standards as the base to protect the framework of those financial regulatory alignment, financial services organizations. We see that from the FFIEC InfoSec booklet, this is kind of where we're going to show some of the examples going forward, but there are two kind of sections that are most impactful, I think, in our business. The change management within IT environments, where management should have processes and procedures to really tie down the configuration management of the IT systems. That is square in the house of what Chef Infra our core product known for the last 12 years. Hardening of systems and applications, really the testing capability that we have to validate that those systems are hardened is big time in our wheelhouse. And then provide using a standard build. What better way to have a standard build if not through codification, through creating policies as code or controls as code, right? And then patch management, obviously something that we do very, very efficiently. And then the section 15 is on top of logical security around operating system access, application access, remote access, and the use of remote devices. All of that that logic can be put into code, can be codified, and becomes the single source of truth. So very impactful area that we can provide some real solid background of support for your compliance and your security validation aspects. Any thoughts there, Chris?
Yeah, no, when you think about the core of what automation can do, specifically with these two, right? You want to understand, especially from a gardener perspective, you want to understand, how you can actually inspect, test. When we say inspect, we mean test, those changes or those things that we're putting into the environment, and then ensure that we have the ability to control, what those settings would look like, right? If we need to harden the system, if we need to create a standard build, containers are so popular these days, but understanding how those containers are built, what's in those containers, how those controls are set up during build time, those are all things that we want to standardize and can be automated, as well as understanding the level of security that's happening in terms of access rights, right? How we get access to applications, even the system itself. But remote access, right? If we need help or we need to log into something and do the work, but remote devices, how would those devices remain in alignment and or configured in the right policy compliance that the customer has, even while off network, if they should be laptops or anything else. So these are very this is the root base of everything that's in this handbook. But there's there are a number of things obviously that the FFIEC does, including building structures, physical security and cameras and all the other things. But for us, this is at the core of what it is that we can do.
Now, Chris, you're going to talk about some show and tell, I guess, on how some of Chef Compliance can help specific areas of vulnerability and how we help kind of validate and remediate those content.
Yeah, actually, let's take a look at some of the way we do, some of the ways that we can do these things. And we'll just give you some general, I'll show you some code here and give you some general ideas of what we're doing. And then you can interpolate that into your own workflows and understand, hey, this is how this might help me, or this is the functionality or the control that I could get within my environment using automation. So if you go on to the next one, here we're talking about, what is that independent language? What is that common language that we could all use between development, operations, and security, right? And then here is a good example of, very simply, we're saying, hey, tell me, let's test this. Tell me what is happening with port 80. Is it on? Is it off? Is it listening? Is it not? Are we using CMP? Are we creating PKI certificates for access, right? And understanding what that protocol would be like. In the next slide, we see a number of examples, but understanding first, hey, I have the ability to test and understand what's in those particular systems. But remember, this is all code. So at scale, we can do this on a large group of systems. Some of our bigger customers with tens of hundreds of thousands of nodes that are out there being checked, it's much easier to do this with code in an automated fashion. So doing things like understanding that Project A would have Apache 2 installed on it, or being able to take action such as, hey, I know I need to have this particular file on this particular server. How about we create that file in the second one down, and then ensure that the security around that is set up properly, right? It should be owned by a certain individual. A group may have access to it, and its access rights would be, at these settings. But to be very granular, we can get into saying, hey, well, if that particular application is installed, is it enabled? Can I start and stop it? But then the flexibility, especially in hybrid environments, to say, hey, Chris, I'm working on both an on-prem system and an off-prem system, which a lot of our financials do. There's just simply things that they won't allow to be off-premise because they have certain security or homegrown security things that surround access rights to that. But in these three examples to the right, we've got, AWS roles, understanding that, those things that are implemented and are being employed. S3 buckets, ensuring that we've got storage set up and set up properly, should not be public in this instance. Or even, say Azure network interfaces, right? We need to be able to have a full picture of what it is in terms of what we call the attack surface, and ensure that we're in alignment with the way security should be from that particular organization's aspect. So let's take a look at some real world examples. If we put all these things together, these are what we call recipes, but if you put them together in a cookbook, then you can do a number of things, right? You have the ability to do a lot of things. So if we put these together, this is a real world example of installing a particular application and understanding if it exists in there, right? So I want to install this application or ensure that this application is there. Why is that important? Well, I don't want to have to go through all the overhead process of just doing these things. It's not so binary as it's either on or it's off. It's, hey, let's check to see if it's there first. Okay, I've tested that, right? Now let's come back and say, well, if it is, then I'll let you know. But if it isn't, then I'm just going to go ahead and install it, right? Because that's my next stage in that process. And I'll tell you about it. I'll install that particular application, go out to where I have the package, and then grab the license that I need to be able to make sure that it's installed properly. Let's go to another, in my last example, in a real world CVE, right? This is the MS Print condition. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, hey, I want to understand if I'm patched on, in this particular area of my environment. Let's go off and let's check, the print spoolers and understand if the hotfix is there, right? And I don't want to go through all the steps if it's not, but if it is, but if it's not, then I want to ensure, and this is how I do it, understanding what's running and what's not, right? In this case, the spooler should not be enabled. It should not be running. I want to check my registry keys and understand, the settings for those particular instances. And that way I have a great understanding and visibility to whether or not I'm secure from this particular CVE. And this is straightforward. I mean, this will come back. You saw the language. It'll come back with, once you put this in an overall sequence of events in terms of your DevSecOps pipeline, you'll be able to have full visibility and understand. And this is something you can roll out at scale. You understand I have environments with maybe all Linux systems. I've got Ubuntu and CentOS and everything else, but this one's specific to probably end servers that are Windows based. And so we'll run it against those particular things and they'll vary. But after you have this, you can set this up to run all over. So yes, there's some initial work that you do to set these things up, but it's very pliable, it's very agile, and it allows you to have the control that you want to have from all aspects, no matter if you're doing development, if you're doing operations or security. This is straightforward and everybody can agree.
Because it's in code, because it can be automated and streamlined, the scalability aspect is just insanely awesome, right? We have a customer that's going to be speaking at ChefConf coming up in September that talks about cloud instances on the 8 to 10,000 instances that they're scanning within 6 hours. So it's just insane the amount of scalability that we're able to provide because it's all done through code. So if you have any questions, remember to please post them on your chat so that we can get to them.
Yeah, please put them in the chat. This is, you know, one of the things we don't talk about often enough, Alan, is not only the fact that it's code and it's scalable, but it's also very agile in interoperability, right? So you don't have to rip and replace the current systems that you have. I have the ability now as code to even integrate in other toolkits that you've already got in place. I don't care whether you're running in AWS or Azure or GCP or Alibaba, it doesn't matter. If you're on-prem with VMs, you're running Docker and Kubernetes, these will all pieces that that will run across the board, that you can get in and understand. It's very declarative. It's not anything that, takes in a whole decipher kit to pull apart and understand what's happening. And it gives you full visibility, right? I'm not beholden to, just one particular pane of glass, depending on what cloud provider I'm using. The financials love that aspect of it because, they might have some VMs and some containers running on-prem, and then they might have AWS or or Azure installed, and they have one pane of glass to be able to look at their compliance from, and also share, right? I've seen many times we've piped a lot of this data right into their Splunk or ArcSight views for their SIMs. Um, you know, it's very it's a very interesting thing to get a hold of, but it does require some upfront work, and in the long run, your whole entire group will benefit from the work that's put in here.
Yeah, and I think that you kind of bring something up that kind of reminds me also of the aspect that we have two modules, right? There's an aspect of validation and testing of your compliance state, but then the remediation aspect of it, you can. We'd love to for you to use Chef, but you don't have to. You could actually use another configuration management tool that will remain unnamed. If you are a particular shop and you have that as your configuration management tool, perfectly fine. This compliance tool is completely separate from it. You're able to still maintain test for compliance, maintain the visibility of your compliance state, but more importantly, provide flags and aspects of this is out of compliance, you need to address it, and which can be used by Chef in a streamlined way, but also other configuration tools.
Yeah. I spoke earlier a little bit about the velocity of how things get there, Alan. I think oftentimes we forget why we brought automation in, which was simply to go fast, right? What we found, boots on the ground, when we employ those automated processes, is that it can even sometimes cause security vulnerabilities, right? Where we have group permissions, where we have group accounts, where we've got direct access to your production environment, and we're making changes that go untested, right? Where we have the ability, number one, we have this great ability to say, hey, look, we can do this instantly. We've got a 0 day and we can go in and change something, right now, which is great, right? We're very fast to make sure things are shut down and we're protected. But then the reality was, hey, we went in and we turned off this particular thing, and there was a dependency on that server. We didn't examine it properly, and all the dependencies for all the other things. I've got a backend database. I've got an Elasticsearch. I've got all these other things that I'm doing to ensure that my operations is running at the best ability that it can be. And I've just gone in and I've broken it. So testing is key. And literally what you brought in to go fast with has really slowed you down even more than you thought in the beginning. So to be able to do those initial checks and just simply do the testing and understand where you want to spend your time in making changes to the environment, and you can use any tools that you want to, but to be able to test first really accelerates that velocity. It allows you to understand, the changes that you're making, how predictable it will be once you make that change on whether or not you will break anything. So the reliability goes out the roof. You've got a better understanding of how your system is going to be at the end of the change or changes. And then, you're really starting to move fast with your automation, which is what you wanted in the first place. So, there's a best practice around what we've been doing in the past, I don't know, 12, 13 years now. And those lend themselves to some really interesting and very progressive styles of security and compliance.
Right. Great point. So one question we usually get is, okay, great. This is all great and sounds very awesome, but who's really using these things? So here is a story from a unnamed source. Unfortunately, we can't name them, but they are a financial technology company. And they provide more than, several hundred products and services that enable their customers actually to process their financial transactions, automate their businesses, and ultimately succeed in increasing their competitive marketplace. They have a very complex environment and rapid growth through the acquisitions and mergers that they've had gone through in their environments. They were facing the challenge. Their operations teams actually needed to provide a healthy and compliant operating system environment for their business units to run their applications. They also needed to manage hundreds of configurations across thousands of systems. So compliance is also a top priority for this organization. So their inability to visualize the compliance state across their fleet and different environments and automating the remediation made the constant audit cycle very challenging and very time consuming. The solution, the way they found it, was through Chef Compliance Automation, which is our comprehensive offering, which consists of Chef Infra, Chef Inspect, and Chef Automate. Chef Infra really manages the configuration and the remediation to ensure the desired state. Chef Inspect tests that aspect that we were talking about, the testing the fleet with profiles and confirms the compliance state, showing the results beyond active vulnerabilities or exploits. And Chef Automate is ultimately the visibility tool, providing into the visibility into the compliance state of the entire fleet, all in one place, all in one pane of glass. Ultimately, by implementing this, the organization was able to prevent them from relying on those vulnerability scans, which they could only do every 2 to 4 weeks due to their resource consumption, very time consuming, very resource heavy, so they can only do it every so often. They can now scan every 6 to 9 hours in 60 seconds for their industry best practices, their CIS benchmarks that they base on, and internally adopt those standards to get the compliance visibility across their entire fleet. They eliminated the constant requests for the same remediation procedure. Instead, the issues are proactively discovered and remediated with very little human interaction. The ability to determine what is and what isn't compliant and see that store the compliance state over time makes the audit cycles very predictable, very painless, and very, very efficient. Do you have anything else from a customer perspective, Chris?
Efficiency is key. Most customers, from a security aspect, have nearly all the tools, especially in the financials. But that causes oftentimes a lot of sprawl with, particular scripts and or settings and or findings, and they want to bring it all together. So, being efficient is, probably paramount, in a security setting or in a compliance setting for that matter, for ops and development to be looking at. So, Automate has been a huge relief to a lot of our customers. The agility and being able to say install our visibility tools and inspect in a container and deploy that anywhere to inspect all their environments and bring it back to that pane of glass. But that pane of glass is also, it has the ability to pull in certified templates that you can either run as a best practice. Hey, I'm using the standard NIST, 800-53, settings for my infrastructure, or then maybe there's some things that, because it says code, you need to manipulate. And so that better works to fit out for your organization and the particular things that they need to secure. And then allows you to schedule that for whenever you'd like it to be done. So it gives you that full picture of everything that's there. So yeah, that's really why they come to us. I have one customer with literally over 100,000 instances that they monitor, and to be able to get that data back, and then be audit compliant at any point in time, they love it. It saved them so much time, so much effort, and a lot of money, right? Consolidation of tool sets and other things to create that efficiency.
Very cool. Just some closing thoughts as we, again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'd love to answer those directly. Some final thoughts. So security and compliance requirements as code is an imperative way for you to be able to allow the streamlining of those processes and procedures. Allowing the codification of compliance as code allows you to put it directly into a delivery process. We actually talk about this, Chris, in terms of the human-free zone. There's a webinar that Chris and I talked about this earlier. If you want more details, it's really in depth on how to streamline that with very little human interaction and human interface. And ultimately, like I talked about, you're able, by having everything as code, you're able to shift it left into development, but also shifting it right into production, maintaining a comprehensive, continuous compliance state, independent of what stage in your development, in your production environment. And ultimately, this is something that is validated by Gartner also, where they believe that compliance automation is vital because it removes the manual execution steps. It minimizes the potential for human error, becoming a human-free zone again, and it enhances the consistency, traceability, and auditability. So this is a Gartner report, which you will also have access to from our website if you want to learn more about that information. So as we kind of wrap things up, if you have more interest in the webinars, that's where you can find it on our registration page. If you like this webinar and want to share it with your colleagues, the same registration page is used for your on-demand content. We have a white paper that talks about the chef compliance of FFIEC and how we help specifically with these examples and more on how to do that. We have other reference customers that can be found on chef.io/customers. And more importantly, if you want to hear directly from the customers, make sure to register for ChefConf 2021 coming on. It's online. It will be on September 6th, 7th through 9th. And you can get more information from them on chefconf.io. Any closing thoughts, Chris, while we see if there's any questions?
No, this is great, Alan. Thanks so much for having me. I encourage everyone to register for ChefConf. It's going to be fabulous. We got some great speakers, great examples. We're going to have a bunch of demos that are happening, and then a lot of best practice, right, that we bring from years and years of experience. So please get registered for that. I'd love to see you there myself, and looking forward to taking your questions.
That is great. I don't see there's any questions, but anyways, if you have anything after the fact and you want to reach out to Chris or I, you can. LinkedIn and other social on the internets. You can certainly find us out there, and hopefully this has been informative and provided you some insight on how we can help Chef, or how Chef Compliance can help guide and can help you with your FFIEC compliance. Once again, Chris, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone. And Raisa, you have some closing thoughts?
Yep, thank you so much, Alan. Thanks a lot, Chris. I hope that you guys found a lot of value in this presentation, in this webinar today. So as Alan already informed you guys, in case if you guys want to share this presentation, if you guys like this webinar, please share the presentation with your teammates. And we will share the on-demand version with you guys very soon. It should be available by tomorrow or day after. So we will email it to you as soon as it's ready. So that's all. I mean, thanks again for attending it, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Chris. Have a good day.
See you.